The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. As Jesus was leaving Jericho with his disciples and a sizable crowd, Bartimaeus, a blind man, the son of Timaeus, sat by the roadside begging. On hearing that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to cry out and say, "Jesus, Son of David, have pity on me." And many rebuked him, telling him to be silent. But he kept calling out all the more, "Son of David, have pity on me." Jesus stopped and said, "Call him." So they called the blind man, saying to him, "Take courage, get up, Jesus is calling you." He threw aside his cloak, sprang up, and came to Jesus. Jesus said to him in reply, "What do you want me to do for you?" The blind man replied to him, "Master, I want to see." Jesus told him, "Go your way, your faith has saved you." Immediately he received his sight and followed him on the way. The Gospel of the Lord.
Jesus Christ. Good morning and welcome. And depending on your degree of enthusiasm, either all of us got to bed a lot earlier last night than the night before, or at least, as in my case, woke up a whole lot happier this morning than yesterday. And like a good mystery novel, the Red Sox like to keep us in suspense right up till the end. And I mention that partly because I'm guessing most of us are Red Sox fans, but it's also relevant to my homily this morning. Because there's one thing I could never quite understand, and perhaps there's some of you here, and I don't mean any offense by it, but I know there are some people who, when they get a good mystery, a good fiction novel, they like to go right to the end, find out how it's going to end, and then go back and read how it builds up to that, rather than wait till the final moments, the final chapters, to find out how it turns out. And while that makes no sense to me in reading a novel, there's an insight there that's helpful to us when it comes to reading the scriptures. Because very often, and today's gospel passage is an example of that, when the evangelists give us an event in Jesus' life, we can miss the whole point if we don't read the end first, but rather wait for it to build up. So for example, in today's narrative, if we simply begin at the beginning, where Bartimaeus is yelling out for Jesus, and follow the dramatic events as they build, we might think that the climax of the whole story is that Jesus gives him his sight back. Yet in fact, that's not what Mark wants us to take from this event. If we go to the end of the story, we hear Jesus' words to Bartimaeus, "Your faith has saved you." That is the climax of the event. And then he goes off, free of his affliction. And so we begin there. What is this faith that Bartimaeus has that brings him to salvation? Because that's our faith as well. We are saved by that faith. And Bartimaeus can teach us what that faith is. And in the first instance, we see that Bartimaeus knows in whom it is he is putting his faith. Certainly as a blind beggar, it's no surprise that he would have heard about Jesus performing miracles. But he knows more than that. It is clear that even though he's a blind beggar, he's been asking questions. He's been doing his homework. Notice that he calls out to Jesus, not "heal me," but "have mercy on me." He's been asking questions. He knows that Jesus is not just someone who has the power to heal, but Jesus is someone who cares about him. That Jesus is someone of mercy and compassion. Not just a miracle worker, but someone who cares about the poor, about the blind, about the lame. Yet he still knows even more. He calls out to Jesus, Jesus, Son of David. This is the only instance in the Gospel according to Mark where anybody uses that title, Son of David. The blind beggar knows Jesus' lineage. We know from the Gospels according to John and Matthew that well into Jesus' public ministry as an adult, people knew who his parents were. They knew they were Mary and Joseph. They knew he was from Nazareth. Bartimaeus has been asking a lot of questions about this Jesus. He wants to know who he is, not just whether or not he can heal him. And so too for us. We are saved by that same faith, and we are called to know the one in whom we put that faith. It is passages like this that give us our Catholic tradition of faith and reason. We are called to have a faith in search of understanding. Like Bartimaeus, it's not enough to just believe. We must understand what we believe. Like Bartimaeus, to know the one in whom we are putting our faith. And then there's the hindrances put to Bartimaeus. The more he yells, Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me, the more the people tell him to be quiet. The more they tell him to be quiet, the more he yells out. The faith that saves, Bartimaeus' faith, is a faith that overcomes obstacles. It's a faith that has perseverance and commitment behind it. And so too with us. There are so many distractions to our growing in our faith. Some of them are merely distractions, conflicts in our schedule, for example. But there are other distractions that can lead us away from God, that can lead us toward things that are not of our faith. But then there's those obstacles we put in our own way. One of the reasons perhaps the people are telling Bartimaeus to be quiet is because if he's blind, well, he must be a sinner. So why would Jesus pay any attention to him? There are times when we say to ourselves, why would God listen to my prayers? I'm a sinner. I don't have enough faith. Like Bartimaeus, our faith that leads us to salvation is a faith of perseverance, to overcome those obstacles, not just the ones from outside of us, but sometimes even more so, the ones we put in our own way. And then the third point, Bartimaeus throws off his cloak when Jesus calls to him and goes running off. One of the commentaries I consulted for today's homily refers to that as one of the delicious moments in Jesus' life. Bartimaeus has his cloak, and for him that would be probably the most precious possession that he could have. He needs that cloak because he spends most of his day sitting and begging. And because he's blind, he can't go looking for a comfortable place where the crowds are going to be. He needs the cloak to sit on so that he can find any place where someone might be passing by. But more importantly, because he's blind, it will be hard for him to find a place of shelter in the evening. And it's highly unlikely anyone is going to bring him in. He needs the cloak to stay warm. Yet when Jesus calls to him, he throws the cloak aside. His is a faith of enthusiasm. It's a faith that wants to believe. Bartimaeus has no plan B. He takes that true leap of faith. And so too for us, to have a faith that wants to believe, a faith that wants to know more about the one in whom we put our faith, a faith that wants to overcome those obstacles that get in our way, a faith that, like Bartimaeus, has no plan B. And then the fourth and last point, Bartimaeus in prayer asks the right question. It's no mistake and no accident that St. Mark puts today's event right after the one we heard in last week's gospel account, in which Jesus says the exact same question. What do you want me to do for you? And last week, we heard his disciples, James and John, say, we want to sit, one on your right, one on your left. We want honor, power, and glory with you. That's not what Bartimaeus says. He says simply and humbly, I want to see. I want to be made whole. I want to be safe. I want to be able to be part of the community again. He asks the right question, the question that comes from humility. In many ways, we might say that Bartimaeus is praying the Lord's Prayer. What do you want me to do for you? Give me today my daily bread. You don't have to make up for yesterday. I'm not worried about tomorrow. Take care of me today. Forgive me my sins as I try to forgive the sins of others, and protect me from evil. Make me whole. Keep me safe. Make me part of the community. That's all Bartimaeus wants. And that's the faith that saves us as well. Not a prayer that asks for greatness, but the simple prayer of the Lord's Prayer. Daily bread, forgiveness of sin, protection from evil. This is the faith that saves Bartimaeus. And, by the way, he does get his eyesight back. But the point that Mark wants us to take is understanding the faith by which we are saved. A faith that wants to know about this one in whom we believe. A faith that has perseverance to overcome obstacles. A faith of enthusiasm. A faith that wants to understand, that wants to move on. And a faith that has no plan B. And a faith that asks the simplest of requests. Daily bread, to be made whole, to be safe, to be part of the community.